Robert Stack's former home stood on a shaded street in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles, where winding roads coiled between mansions hidden behind gates and hedges. Built in the late 1930s, Stack's house was a Spanish Revival estate, white stucco walls, red tile roof, arched doorways, and an interior heavy with dark wood beams and wrought iron fixtures. After Stack's death in 2003, the house changed hands twice, but neither family stayed long. It wasn't until 2017 that the Branners, a couple from Chicago with 2 teenage children, bought the property. They had been drawn by the old Hollywood history, the privacy, and the lush gardens that encased the lot like a green fortress. Thomas and Lynn Branner were pragmatic, no-nonsense people. Thomas was a litigation attorney, and Lynn worked in art restoration. They didn't believe in hauntings or paranormal phenomena. When their realtor casually mentioned Robert Stack's connection along with his long tenure hosting Unsolved Mysteries, the Branners chuckled. It was a fun piece of trivia, nothing more. But the house had a stillness even on sunny afternoons. Their daughter, Casey, noticed it first. She claimed that her bedroom on the second floor, which overlooked the garden, always felt unnaturally cold. Even when the LA heat baked the exterior, her room remained icy. The parents attributed it to old insulation. Then Casey started hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night. Heavy, deliberate footsteps as if someone in hard-soled shoes was pacing the corridor. Her parents dismissed it, thinking it was her brother Owen wandering. But Owen was a deep sleeper and swore he never left his bed. Lynn soon began to notice strange disruptions in her restored art pieces, which she kept in a small studio on the first floor. She'd return to her work to find brushes on the floor, jars of solvent uncapped, or her paintings rotated on the wall, always tilted slightly, as if someone had been scrutinizing them at a strange angle. She blamed the housekeeper until the security system logs showed no one had entered that wing of the house during those hours. What made them start taking these disturbances seriously was the study. It had been Robert Stack's personal library, left largely unchanged by previous owners. Dark wood shelves filled with leather-bound books, many on crime, history, and Hollywood. In the evenings, Thomas often used the room to read. One night, deep into a legal brief, he heard the faint sound of whispering, soft, raspy murmurs. At first, he thought it was the wind through the old vents. But the voices grew louder, as if someone was speaking from just behind the bookshelves. When he stood to inspect, the air turned sharply cold, and the lights dimmed, not flickering, but as if the very power of the room was slowly being drained. He left the study abruptly, trying to rationalize the experience, but his gut told him otherwise. Weeks passed, and the family tried to ignore the anomalies. But then the nightly pacing in the upstairs hallway escalated. Now the footsteps paused right outside Casey's door. On several nights, she swore she saw the doorknob slowly turning, though it never fully opened. She started sleeping with a baseball bat. Eventually, they called in a local historian who specialized in LA's celebrity homes. She told them that Stack had been intensely private, spending many of his later years inside that house, obsessed with crime mysteries and unresolved cases, sometimes watching old footage of unsolved mysteries in his study until dawn. She mentioned that he passed away from heart failure right inside that house in the study where Thomas had heard the whispers. Desperate for answers, they also brought in a paranormal investigator. Cameras and recorders were set up around the house, particularly in the study and the upstairs hallway. They captured something on the third night, a tall, shadowy figure, distinctly male in posture, walking the upstairs landing. On audio, they caught a low, stern voice muttering, "There are questions, still questions." The Branners tried to coexist with whatever remained of Robert Stack, but the presence grew more assertive. Doors would slam on their own. The sound of deep, measured breathing filled rooms. At one point, Owen was pushed, not stumbled, but shoved down the last 2 steps of the staircase, though no one was near him. That was the breaking point. By late 2018, just over a year since moving in, the Branners sold the house quietly, at a financial loss. The listing was discreet. The new owners, reportedly a foreign investor who rarely visits, keep the property largely vacant. Neighbors say lights still flicker on in the study at night, even though no one's there. Locals whisper that Robert Stack is still in his house, pacing the halls, restless in his need to understand to uncover one last unsolved mystery. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The house sat silent after the Branners left, shrouded in an unbroken stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Weeds began to creep along the garden's stone pathways, and the once manicured hedges grew wild, obscuring the outer walls behind a dense tangle of green. Even the fountain in the central courtyard, where water once gurgled gently, now stood dry and crusted with a pale green film, as if nature itself recoiled from the property. For nearly a year, no one lived there. The foreign investor who'd bought it, some business figure from the Middle East, never stepped foot inside. He hired a management company to maintain the grounds minimally, just enough to keep the city from issuing violations. But the staff they sent, landscapers, cleaners, never stayed long. Some came once, then refused to return. Others quit without notice. One of them, an older gardener named Esteban, had worked in Holmby Hills for decades. He was known for his quiet, hard-working manner, never one to entertain ghost stories or neighborhood gossip. But when asked why he refused to return to the Stack house, he'd only mutter in Spanish, "Hey un hombre que camina ahí dentro siempre mirando, nunca dormido." There is a man walking in there, always watching, never sleeping. Then, in late 2020, someone finally expressed interest in the house, not to live in it, but to film. A small documentary crew rented the property for a week. They were shooting a segment on old Hollywood legends and urban legends, and the Stack house, with its storied past and rumors of hauntings, was the perfect backdrop. They set up camp mostly in the living room and the study, drawn to the heavy atmosphere of the wood-paneled library where Stack had reportedly spent most of his final days. The crew was small: a director named Leah, a cameraman, a sound tech, and an assistant. From the first evening, they remarked how the air in the house felt thick, like a room that had been sealed for decades despite the open doors and windows. Sound carried oddly through the hallways. Footsteps echoed twice, sometimes 3 times, even if only one person was walking. On their second night of filming, the cameraman, Joel, decided to get B-roll footage of the upstairs landing. The space was broad, with iron railings overlooking the grand foyer below. As he panned his camera, he caught something unexpected through the viewfinder: a shape, darker than the shadows, standing still at the far end of the corridor near one of the guest bedrooms. Joel blinked, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when he dropped the camera and looked with his eyes directly, there was nothing. Yet when he reviewed the footage moments later, the figure was still there, a tall man in what looked like a dark suit, standing rigidly, face obscured in shadow. Joel didn't sleep that night. He kept the lights on in his temporary room downstairs and refused to go back to the landing. The third night was worse. The sound tech, Darren, woke up to a persistent sound of murmuring, low and rhythmic, like someone speaking to themselves in the room next door. But there was no room next door. His bed backed up to a solid wall that separated the guest suite from the library downstairs. Still, the voices continued, just on the other side of the plaster, urgent yet unintelligible. When he pressed his ear against the wall, Darren swore he heard his own name spoken in a breathy voice. "Darren, come see." The voice was male, deep, familiar somehow, though he couldn't place it. He didn't tell the others that morning. He was too shaken, uncertain if he'd dreamed it. By the 5th night, Leah, the director, began feeling the strain. Sleep-deprived and increasingly anxious, she started hearing footsteps outside her bedroom door. Slow, deliberate pacing, like a man waiting for her to open the door. She sat up in bed, staring at the threshold, convinced the handle would begin to turn. But it never did. Still, the footsteps persisted, sometimes retreating, then returning, a repetitive loop that stretched into the early morning. They wrapped filming a day early. The entire crew agreed without discussion. Each of them felt the house wanted them gone. On their final night, they captured a shot of the library that none of them remembered setting up. A still image, perfectly framed, of the empty study. But in the far corner, next to the old oak desk where Robert Stack used to sit, there was the faint outline of a figure. Not clearly visible, but undeniably present, a man in a suit, watching. When the footage was reviewed back in their editing studio, the timestamp on that particular shot didn't match any of their scheduled filming. It had recorded at 3:12 a.m. when every member of the crew had been in bed or too terrified to roam the house. They didn't include that shot in the final cut. None of them wanted to explain it on camera. Since then, the house remains empty again. Neighbors claim they occasionally see a light flicker on in the study, though the power was disconnected months ago. Some say that if you pass by on foot late at night, you can hear a man's voice carrying through the hedges, steady and authoritative, as though he's still narrating the story of the dead, the missing, the lost. The house stands silent, but never asleep. The house did not like being empty for long. When left alone, it seemed to breathe differently, a low, groaning tension held in the walls and floorboards, as though the house itself strained to hold something within. On particularly dry nights, when the Santa Ana winds moved through the city, neighbors swore they heard more than just trees rustling. There was a resonance, a deep timbre like a man speaking into the wind. They couldn't make out words, only the suggestion of speech, as if the house was still engaged in a conversation no one else could hear. By the spring of 2022, a new caretaker was assigned to visit once a week. His name was Eugene, a quiet man in his 50s who lived in Van Nuys. He was paid well to inspect the grounds, run water through the pipes to keep them from seizing, and to generally ensure the property wasn't falling into disrepair. Eugene didn't ask questions. He'd worked for the same management company for years, accustomed to tending homes whose owners never appeared. At first, Eugene thought little of the house's reputation. He had heard the whispers about Robert Stack, about the Branners and the filming crew, but he didn't believe in ghosts. His first visits were uneventful. The house was still, the air stale but undisturbed. Dust gathered on the wooden banisters and the old bronze sconces, but that was expected. But then, one afternoon, he noticed something that disturbed his sense of routine. The study's door, which he always left open, was now closed. Not just pushed to, but latched, the old brass knob turned fully into place. It was strange, but he rationalized that perhaps a draft had caught it. Yet there was no breeze that day. Inside the study, nothing seemed out of place. The same leather chair faced the wide mahogany desk. The same framed photographs on the bookshelves, black and white images of Hollywood actors, vintage studio shots, and a single portrait of Robert Stack himself, seated sternly, his jaw tight and his eyes locked with the camera's gaze. As Eugene turned to leave, he heard something faint, so faint he wasn't sure it was real. A low chuckle. A man's chuckle, brief, dry, amused at some private joke. He froze mid-step, listening for more, but the sound didn't return. The house held its breath again. On subsequent visits, Eugene began to feel observed. Not watched, observed, as though someone stood just behind him, assessing his movements with quiet calculation. He found the study door closed each time he arrived, no matter how firmly he'd left it open before. One day, curiosity got the better of him. He stayed longer than usual, sitting down in the dusty leather chair behind Stack's old desk. For a moment, he imagined what it must have been like for the man surrounded by books on crime, cold case files, a television once perched on the side table where episodes of unsolved mysteries played well into the night. He placed his hands on the armrests, the leather cracked and brittle under his palms. Then he heard it again, the chuckle, this time closer, sharper, and then words, low and spoken directly into his right ear. "Not everything has an answer, Eugene." He shot up, heart pounding, spinning around, but the study was empty. Dust hung in the slats of light breaking through the heavy curtains. No sign of anyone else. But the air had shifted. The cold was palpable, sinking into his bones, and Eugene felt unmistakably unwelcome. After that, he began his visits with a new ritual. He'd announce himself aloud upon entering the house, his voice echoing weakly in the cavernous space. "It's just me, just here to check the pipes." It made him feel ridiculous, but less alone. On his last visit, before he abruptly quit the position, Eugene found something that convinced him never to return. On the desk in the study, laid neatly in the center, was an old VHS tape. Its label was handwritten, barely legible. "Unsolved, never aired." There was no VCR in the house anymore. The previous owners had cleared out the electronics. Eugene didn't take the tape, didn't even touch it. But he could not explain how it had gotten there, or who had placed it. The handwriting, tight and formal, looked disturbingly like Robert Stack's Eugene had seen enough signed memorabilia in the house to recognize it. He left that afternoon and called his supervisor, refusing further assignments at the property. Now the house sits untouched, the gardens wild, the courtyard fountain cracked with age. At night, sometimes, passing drivers see a light shining from the study window, even though no electricity should flow to that part of the estate. The outline of a tall man sometimes appears in the frame, standing by the window, still watching, waiting. What he waits for, no one knows. After Eugene quit, the house entered another long silence. Almost 2 years passed with no activity. The vines that curled along the perimeter gates thickened, reaching over the iron like fingers clutching upward toward something unseen. Leaves choked the gutters. The pool in the back, once a crisp rectangle of light blue, turned dark and murky, the surface covered in a thin layer of greenish film. The once grand home had fallen into a peculiar kind of decay, not total collapse, but a slow, unnerving neglect that made the place feel forgotten by time. Then, in the winter of 2023, a couple named Graham and Melissa Kindler arrived. They were in their mid-40s, not naive, not easily spooked, but not hardened either. Graham was a documentary producer with an interest in folklore and American legends. Melissa taught history at a private high school in the valley. They had no children, just a quiet marriage and a fondness for stories. When they discovered the Stack house had been sitting empty for years unlisted, held in limbo by a disinterested foreign investor, Graham saw an opportunity. He'd read the rumors online, the vague mentions in niche forums. Stories of pacing footsteps, whispers in the walls, a VHS tape labeled, "Unsolved," never aired. He was fascinated. Graham made a call, found the management company, and offered to rent the property for 3 months. His idea was simple. Live in the house, document everything. Capture every creak, every oddity, and turn it into a docuseries, The Final Case. Inside Robert Stack's house. Melissa reluctantly agreed. She didn't share his enthusiasm for ghosts, but she understood his need to pursue it. And truthfully, part of her was curious too. They moved in on January 10th. Their first night was quiet. Cold. Yes, the house took a long time to warm, but otherwise uneventful. Melissa explored the kitchen, still lined with original tile and heavy oak cabinets. Graham wandered into the library and spent the evening taking photographs of the bookshelves and built-in drawers. He found several of Stack's old books still shelved neatly, thick encyclopedias on crime, law, and military history. It wasn't until their third night that something changed. Melissa was walking past the base of the stairs around 10:30 p.m. when she felt a shift in the air. Not just cold, but pressure, like walking into a room that had just been vacated by someone angry. She paused. The chandelier above her began to sway gently, though the air in the house was perfectly still. No open doors, no drafts. Upstairs, Graham was setting up a camera in the hallway. He called out to her. "Did you hear that?" She hadn't heard anything. Sounded like someone said something. He murmured, distracted, adjusting the tripod. That night, the first recording captured something they didn't expect. Not a shadow, not a ghostly shape, but audio. A clear voice on the hallway mic. A low male voice, quiet but unmistakable. "Don't let it be forgotten." Graham was electrified. He reviewed the file a dozen times. No manipulation, no interference. It was as though someone had spoken directly into the mic. Over the next 2 weeks, the house changed. Not drastically, subtly. Lights flickered more often. They began to hear faint footsteps between 1 and 2 a.m., always descending the stairs but never ascending. Melissa started to wake at the same time each night, 3:12 a.m., with no explanation. Her dreams empty, her chest tight with the sensation of being watched. Then they found the tape. It appeared on the floor of the library one morning, not on the desk, but near the corner of the room, beside the fireplace. Dustless, clean, and chilling in its presence. The label was the same as Eugene had described. Unsolved, never aired. This time, the handwriting was unmistakably recent. Fresh black ink, not faded. And below the main label, smaller. For the right eyes only. Graham was both thrilled and uneasy. They had no VCR in the house, but he acquired one the next day, sourced from a pawn shop on Melrose. That evening, they played the tape. The footage was grainy, clearly from the Unsolved Mysteries era but different. No music, no intro. Just Stack standing in the study of the very house they now lived in. He looked older, gaunter, his face slightly sunken, as though filmed late in life. He spoke directly to the camera. Some stories were never meant to be told. They were brought to me, but I never aired them. Too close to home. Too personal. If you're watching this, it means the story has found you. Or perhaps you have found it. Then the tape distorted visual static bloomed across the screen. When it cleared, the footage was inside the house, camera panning through the upstairs hallway. There was no crew, no voiceover, just the sound of slow, deliberate breathing. Melissa turned it off. She was pale, visibly shaken. "Why would this exist?" she whispered. Graham didn't answer. That night, they didn't sleep. The next day, the house grew darker. Even with curtains drawn wide and lights on, the shadows seemed to hang longer in the corners. Melissa swore the study smelled different, a scent like burnt film and cold earth. Graham tried to shake it off, bury himself in editing, but every frame of footage they'd collected now seemed wrong. The angles had shifted. In some shots, a tall figure stood partially out of frame, just an elbow visible or the back of a head. But no one had been there. By mid-February, Melissa begged him to leave. "This isn't a story," she said. "It's a place that wants something." Graham refused. "We're too close. I think there's more." That night, at 3:12 a.m., Graham vanished. Melissa woke alone, his side of the bed untouched. The lights in the study glowed faintly under the door. When she opened it, no one was inside. His laptop sat open on the desk. The VHS tape was gone. Security cameras showed him walking into the study at 2:58 a.m. And then nothing. No exit. No cut in footage. Just static for exactly 14 minutes. Then the screen returned the room empty. Melissa left the house the next morning. She didn't pack. She didn't return. The house now sits empty again. Windows shuttered. The gardens overtaken. Occasionally, hikers in the hills above Holmby say they can see a light flickering from the back of the house, in the study window. Some claim to hear a man's voice floating through the dry night air. If you have any information, call our toll-free number. But there is no number, no episode, no resolution. Only the house and whatever Robert Stack was trying to finish still walking its halls. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.